Welcome back to another episode of Historical Battlegrounds, where we dive deep into the most shocking military tactics that changed the course of history. Today, we're traveling back to July 28, 1402 to a dusty plain near Ankara in modern-day Turkey, where two of the most powerful empires of their time were about to collide in what would become one of the most devastating defeats in military history. Picture this. The mighty Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I, known as the Thunderbolt for his lightning-fast victories, commands an army of 85,000 battle-hardened warriors. Across from him stands Timur the Lame, the terrifying conqueror from Central Asia, who's already crushed kingdoms from India to Russia. Both men are at the absolute peak of their power. Both have armies that have never known defeat. But what neither Bayezid nor his generals realize is that Timur has already deployed a secret weapon, one so simple, so devastating, that it will bring the Ottoman Empire to its knees without a single sword being drawn. This isn't about superior tactics or better armor. This is about a brilliant engineering feat that exploits the most basic human need: water. By the end of this battle, one of these emperors will be dead in captivity, his empire shattered for over a decade. The other will be remembered as one of history's most cunning military minds. But the real star of today's story isn't a person at all. It's a creek, a few shovels, and the devastating power of thirst. The question is, how does one small stream become the weapon that destroys an empire? Chapter 1. The Storm from the East. The year is 1398. And the world trembles at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Across the vast steppes of Central Asia, a tempest of mounted warriors sweeps westward, leaving behind them a trail of conquered cities and broken empires. At their head rides a man whose very name has become synonymous with terror: Timur the Lame, known to the west as Tamerlane. You can imagine the scene as Timur's massive army thunders across the landscape. Dust clouds rise like pillars of smoke against the horizon, visible for miles in every direction. The earth itself seems to shake under the weight of 140,000 mounted warriors, their horses bred for endurance and speed on the endless plains of their homeland. Behind them rumble massive siege engines, supply trains stretching for miles, and perhaps most terrifying of all, 32 war elephants captured during Timur's devastating conquest of Delhi. These are not just any soldiers. These are the heirs to Genghis Khan's legacy, warriors who have perfected the art of mobile warfare over generations. Each man carries a composite bow capable of accurately striking targets at over 300 meters, along with enough arrows to darken the sky. They ride with such skill that they can fire with deadly precision while at full gallop, turning retreat into attack and attack into annihilation. But Timur himself is far more than just another steppe warlord. Born in 1336 near Samarkand, he has spent 4 decades transforming himself from the leader of a small nomadic band into the master of an empire stretching from Mongolia to the Mediterranean. Unlike his predecessors, Timur combines the traditional mobility of the steppes with sophisticated siege warfare and psychological operations that would make modern military strategists take notice. The man's physical presence alone strikes fear into his enemies. A childhood injury has left him lame in his right leg, hence his nickname Timur the Lame. But this physical limitation has only seemed to sharpen his mental capabilities. Contemporary accounts describe him as having piercing eyes that seem to see straight through to a person's soul, a voice that can inspire fanatical loyalty in his followers, and a strategic mind that plans campaigns years in advance. This is information warfare before the term existed. Timur's agents spread throughout the lands he intends to conquer, not just gathering intelligence, but spreading carefully crafted rumors about the size and ferocity of his approaching army. Cities surrender before he arrives, their populations fleeing in terror based on stories of his previous conquests. Those who resist face consequences so horrific that they serve as warnings to the next target. In Isfahan, after a relatively minor rebellion against his garrison, Timur ordered the construction of towers made from the severed heads of 70,000 inhabitants. In Damascus, craftsmen and scholars were enslaved and marched back to beautify Samarkand, while the rest of the population faced systematic slaughter. These acts aren't random violence. They're calculated tools of conquest, designed to make future enemies think twice about resistance. By 1402, Timur's empire has reached its zenith. He has crushed the Golden Horde in Russia, devastated the Delhi Sultanate in India, and systematically dismantled the power of rival Central Asian dynasties. His court in Samarkand has become one of the cultural centers of the world, enriched by the tribute and skilled craftsmen taken from conquered territories. But there remains one great power in his path, one empire that has grown strong enough to challenge his dominance: the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire in 1402 represents everything that Timur claims to despise. While he maintains the traditional nomadic customs of the steppes, the Ottomans have embraced sedentary life, building permanent cities and adopting the administrative systems of their conquered territories. Where Timur's army consists primarily of tribal cavalry, the Ottomans have developed a professional military system that includes the famous Janissary Corps' elite infantry, trained from childhood and fanatically loyal to the Sultan. Most importantly, the Ottomans have been enormously successful. Under Sultan Bayezid I, they have conquered most of Anatolia and established a significant presence in the Balkans. They have defeated Crusader armies and brought the Byzantine Empire to the brink of extinction. Their capital at Adrianople, modern Edirne, rivals any city in the Islamic world for wealth and sophistication. This success, in Timur's view, makes them traitors to their Turkic heritage. In his mind, settled Turks have abandoned the pure nomadic traditions that made their ancestors great. They have become corrupted by contact with Persians, Greeks, and other sedentary peoples. Worse still, they have adopted the un-Turkic practice of centralized succession, with power passing directly from father to son, rather than being distributed among tribal leaders according to traditional steppe custom. The clash between these two visions of Turkic power has been building for years. Timur controls the eastern approaches to Anatolia through his client rulers, while Bayezid has been systematically absorbing the independent Turkish emirates that serve as buffer states between the two empires. Each sees the other as a fundamental threat to their vision of how the Turkic world should be organized. The trigger for open warfare comes in 1400, when Bayezid makes a fatal miscalculation. He demands tribute from Erzincan, a small emirate that has recently pledged allegiance to Timur. In the complex world of medieval diplomacy, this isn't just an attack on a minor ally. It is a direct challenge to Timur's authority and an insult that cannot be ignored without appearing weak. Timur's response is swift and devastating. His armies pour into eastern Anatolia, brushing aside Ottoman garrisons and besieging the important city of Sivas. The siege demonstrates everything that makes Timur's military machine so effective. His engineers divert the city's water supply while his siege engines pound the walls. Meanwhile, his psychological warfare specialists spread rumors among the defenders about the fate awaiting those who resist the great conqueror. When Sivas falls, Timur's treatment of the population sends shockwaves throughout Anatolia. The city is not just captured, it is systematically demolished. Buildings are torn down stone by stone. The population is either killed or enslaved, and the surrounding farmland is devastated to ensure the city can never recover. It's a clear message to every other settlement in the region. This is what happens to those who support the Ottomans. But Timur isn't finished. Having established his presence in eastern Anatolia, he begins planning something far more ambitious: a direct assault on the heart of Ottoman power. His target is Ankara, one of the most important cities in the Ottoman Empire and a key junction for trade routes connecting Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. As word of Timur's advance spreads, the entire geopolitical situation in the eastern Mediterranean begins to shift. The Byzantine Emperor Manuel II fighting for the survival of his empire against Ottoman expansion, sees an opportunity in this conflict between his two greatest enemies. Christian kingdoms in the Balkans, recently conquered by the Ottomans, begin to hope for liberation. Even the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt watches nervously, wondering whether they might be Timur's next target. For Bayezid, the situation represents both a crisis and an opportunity. He has spent years building Ottoman power through careful expansion and diplomatic maneuvering. His armies are battle-tested and confident, having never suffered a major defeat during his 13-year reign. His Janissary corps represents perhaps the most professional infantry force in the world, while his sipahi cavalry are the elite heavy horsemen of their era. But Timur's reputation precedes him. This is the man who has conquered an empire stretching from Delhi to Damascus, who has never lost a major battle, whose very approach causes entire armies to desert their posts in terror. The coming confrontation will determine not just the fate of two empires, but the future direction of the entire Islamic world. As both armies prepare for what promises to be one of the greatest military encounters of the medieval period, neither Bayezid nor his generals suspect that Timur has already begun deploying his most devastating weapon. It isn't a new type of cavalry charge or siege engine. It's something far more basic, far more essential to human survival, and far more easily overlooked until it's too late. The stage is set for a battle that will echo through history, but the outcome has already begun to be determined by the quiet work of engineers with shovels, working under cover of darkness to reshape the very landscape of the battlefield. Chapter 2. The Thunderbolt Sultan Bayezid I sits on his throne in the magnificent palace of Adrianople, but his mind is far from the luxurious surroundings of silk tapestries and gold-inlaid weapons that mark his court. Reports stream in daily from the eastern frontier, each one painting a darker picture of the approaching storm. Timur's army has taken Sivas. Timur's forces are moving west. Timur himself has been seen inspecting the approaches to Ankara. For the first time in his 13-year reign, Bayezid faces an enemy who might actually match his own formidable capabilities. His courtiers have given him the nickname Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, in honor of the lightning speed with which he strikes his enemies. But now, for the first time, he's facing another storm cloud equally dark and equally dangerous. You can picture Bayezid as he processes these reports, a man in his mid-50s, still powerfully built despite his years, with the weathered hands of a warrior who has personally led charges against countless enemies. His beard, now touched with gray, frames a face that has learned to mask emotion, a necessary skill for any ruler who has survived the brutal world of medieval politics. But those closest to him can see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drum against the arm of his throne as he considers his options. The Sultan's rise to power has been anything but easy. When he inherited the Ottoman throne in 1389, following his father Murad I's death at the Battle of Kosovo, the empire was still relatively small and faced existential threats from all directions. Christian armies pressed from the west. Rival Turkish emirates challenged Ottoman authority from the east, and internal rebellions threatened to tear the empire apart from within. But Bayezid has proven himself to be perhaps the most capable military commander of his generation. His conquest of the remaining Turkish emirates in Anatolia has transformed the Ottomans from one power among many into the dominant force in the region. His victories in the Balkans have brought Christian kingdoms to their knees and made the Ottoman Empire a major player in European politics. Most dramatically, his siege of Constantinople has brought the 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire to the very brink of extinction. The key to Bayezid's success has been his ability to combine traditional Turkish military virtues with innovative tactics and organizational systems. His army represents a perfect fusion of different military traditions. The corps consists of the Janissary Corps' elite infantry recruited through the diversion system, where Christian boys are taken from their families, converted to Islam, and trained from childhood to be fanatically loyal soldiers. These Janissaries represent something new in medieval warfare. Unlike typical medieval infantry, who were often poorly trained peasants forced into service, the Janissaries are professional soldiers whose entire lives revolve around military service. They train constantly, maintain their equipment to the highest standards, and fight with a discipline that has repeatedly shocked European observers accustomed to the chaotic melees that characterize most medieval battles. Supporting the Janissaries are the sipahi cavalry, the heavy horsemen who form the backbone of Ottoman offensive power. These are men from established military families, equipped with the finest armor and weapons that Ottoman smiths can produce. They fight with a combination of lance, sword, and bow that makes them effective in both shock combat and skirmishing. Most importantly, they fight for honor, glory, and the promise of land grants that will establish their families for generations. But perhaps Bayezid's greatest innovation has been his willingness to incorporate troops from conquered territories into his military system. Serbian knights fight alongside Turkish cavalry. Greek and Bulgarian infantry serve in Ottoman garrisons. Most controversially, Tatar horsemen from recently conquered steppes bring their traditional nomadic skills to Ottoman service. This diversity gives the Ottoman army tremendous flexibility, but it also represents a potential weakness that Bayezid's enemies might exploit. Unlike Timur's forces, which are bound together by shared tribal loyalties and common cultural traditions, the Ottoman army depends on personal loyalty to the Sultan and the promise of continued success to maintain unit cohesion. As reports of Timur's advance continue to arrive, Bayezid faces a decision that will determine the fate of his empire. His initial impulse is to continue the siege of Constantinople, hoping that the capture of the Byzantine capital will provide such a tremendous victory that other threats will fade into insignificance. The city's walls have already been breached in several places, and his engineers believe that one more major assault might be sufficient to finally end Byzantine resistance. But Timur's advance cannot be ignored. Intelligence reports suggest that the Central Asian conqueror commands at least 140,000 warriors, making his army significantly larger than any force the Ottomans have ever faced. Worse still, these aren't just numbers on paper. They're battle-tested veterans who have participated in the conquest of half the known world. To ignore such a threat would be to invite the destruction of everything Bayezid has worked to build. The Sultan's military advisors are divided. His eldest son, Prince Suleiman, argues for continuing the siege of Constantinople. The city is on the verge of falling, he points out, and its capture would provide enormous prestige as well as control over the crucial passage between Europe and Asia. Let Timur waste his strength besieging Anatolian cities, while the Ottomans secure the greatest prize in the Eastern Mediterranean. His generals, however, paint a darker picture. Timur's forces have already demonstrated their ability to take fortified cities through a combination of siege warfare and psychological terror. Ankara is too important to abandon without a fight, and any delay will simply give the enemy more time to consolidate their position and recruit additional allies from among the Ottoman's enemies. Bayezid's brother-in-law, Stefan Lazarević, the Serbian despot who has become one of the Sultan's most trusted advisors, offers perhaps the most sobering assessment. Stefan has fought against the best knights that Christian Europe can produce, and he understands better than most the importance of battlefield logistics and preparation. Timur, he points out, has had months to plan this campaign. His forces are fresh, well-supplied, and fighting in territory where they can expect local support from populations who resent Ottoman rule. The decision, when it comes, reflects both Bayezid's confidence in his own abilities and his understanding of the political realities he faces. To retreat without offering battle would be seen as weakness, potentially encouraging rebellions throughout the empire. To continue the siege while Timur ravages Anatolia would be to abandon his Turkish heartland to foreign conquest. There is really only one choice. He must march east and defeat Timur in open battle. The preparation for this campaign reveals both the strengths and the potential weaknesses of the Ottoman military system. The Bayezid can call upon forces from across his empire. Janissaries from the training grounds of Adrianople, sipahi cavalry from the military settlements of Anatolia, Serbian heavy cavalry from the Balkans, and even some Greek and Bulgarian infantry units from recently conquered territories. But assembling this diverse force takes time that Timur is using to strengthen his position and gather intelligence about Ottoman capabilities. Worse still, many of the non-Turkish units in Bayezid's army have been recruited from populations that might secretly welcome Ottoman defeat. The loyalty of recently conquered Tatars is particularly questionable, given their ethnic and cultural ties to Timur's Central Asian forces. As the Ottoman army finally begins its march eastward in the blazing heat of an Anatolian summer, Bayezid believes he is leading the finest military force that his empire has ever assembled. His 85,000 warriors represent every military tradition from Serbia to Anatolia, every tactical innovation that Ottoman military science has developed, and every advantage that wealth, organization, and experience can provide. But unknown to the Thunderbolt Sultan, his enemy has already begun implementing a strategy that will render all of these advantages meaningless. While Ottoman scouts search for Timur's main force, Timurid engineers are working with quiet efficiency to prepare a battlefield where traditional military virtues will count for nothing. The army that marches east from Constantinople is magnificent in its confidence and terrible in its power. The Janissaries march in perfect formation, their distinctive white felt caps gleaming in the sun. The sipahi cavalry ride with the easy confidence of men who have never known defeat. The Serbian knights, perhaps the finest heavy cavalry in Europe, sport armor and weapons that represent the highest achievements of medieval metallurgy. But for all its strength, this army is marching toward a trap more subtle and more devastating than any that Bayezid has ever encountered. The weapon that will destroy Ottoman power isn't made of steel or iron. It is made of earth and stone, applied with the kind of engineering skill that only comes from generations of steppe warfare. The Thunderbolt is about to discover that even lightning can be earthed. Chapter 3. The Master of Samarkand. In the magnificent city of Samarkand, 800 miles to the east of the approaching battlefield, artisans are working feverishly to complete a new wing of Timur's palace. The walls gleam with intricate tilework in blues and golds that seem to capture the very essence of the Central Asian sky. These craftsmen have been brought here from every corner of Timur's vast empire. Master ceramicists from Damascus, architects from Isfahan, metalworkers from Delhi, and stonecutters from Herat. This is the other side of Timur's character, not just the destroyer of cities, but their greatest patron. Samarkand has become perhaps the most beautiful city in the world, enriched by the tribute and talent extracted from conquered territories. But even as artists perfect their masterpieces, Timur himself is 6 months' march away, preparing to risk everything he has built in a single decisive campaign. Understanding Timur requires understanding the world that shaped him. Born into the Barlas tribe in 1336, he grew up in the remnants of the Mongol Empire, a world where power shifted constantly between rival khans and where survival depended on one's ability to forge and break alliances with lightning speed. The great days of Mongol unity under Genghis Khan and his immediate successors were already fading into legend, replaced by a patchwork of competing khanates that spent more time fighting each other than expanding the empire. But young Timur saw opportunity in this chaos. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who mourned the passing of the great Mongol unity, he recognized that the fragmentation of power created possibilities for a sufficiently ambitious and capable leader. The tribal systems that had once served Genghis Khan could be rebuilt and improved upon. The military techniques that had conquered half the world could be adapted for new challenges. His physical disability, the leg wound that gave him his nickname, the Lame, might have ended the ambitions of a lesser man. In the intensely physical world of steppe politics, where leadership was often proven through personal combat and displays of horsemanship, any sign of weakness could be fatal. But Timur transformed his limitation into a strength, developing intellectual and strategic capabilities that more than compensated for any physical restrictions. By his 30th birthday, Timur had already demonstrated the combination of military genius and political cunning that would characterize his entire career. He had survived the treacherous world of tribal politics, eliminated his rivals through a combination of warfare and assassination, and begun assembling the core of what would become the most feared army in the world. The key to understanding Timur's military system lies in recognizing how he combined traditional steppe warfare with innovations drawn from every military tradition he encountered. At its core, his army remained fundamentally nomadic, mounted archers who could cover vast distances at incredible speed, living off their herds and requiring minimal logistical support. But layered onto this traditional foundation were siege techniques learned from Chinese and Persian engineers, infantry tactics adopted from Middle Eastern armies, and even naval capabilities acquired during his campaigns in the Eastern Mediterranean. Perhaps most importantly, Timur understood that warfare in his era was as much about information and psychology as it was about battlefield tactics. His intelligence network spanned from China to Europe, providing him with detailed knowledge about the capabilities and intentions of potential enemies long before military contact occurred. His agents didn't just gather information, they spread carefully crafted disinformation designed to weaken enemy morale and create political divisions within opposing coalitions. This psychological warfare reached its peak in the legends that surrounded Timur himself. Stories of his conquests grew with each telling, often encouraged by Timur's own agents. Cities that resisted faced complete destruction and the massacre of their populations. But these atrocities were as much political theater as they were expressions of rage. Each horrific example served to weaken the resolve of the next target, making future conquests easier and less costly. The engineering capabilities of Timur's army represented another crucial advantage that his enemies consistently underestimated. Central Asian nomads had a reputation as excellent horsemen but poor siege warriors, more likely to bypass fortified cities than to attempt complex siege operations. Timur had deliberately shattered this stereotype by recruiting the finest military engineers from every conquered territory and integrating their knowledge into a comprehensive system of siege warfare. His engineers could construct elaborate siege engines, dig tunnels under the strongest fortifications, and most relevantly for the coming campaign, reshape the very landscape of a battlefield to create tactical advantages. They understood hydraulic engineering, having learned from Persian and Mesopotamian traditions that had been managing water resources for thousands of years. They could build bridges across the widest rivers, construct temporary dams to control flooding, and redirect streams to serve military purposes. But perhaps the most crucial element of Timur's military genius was his understanding of logistics. Unlike many medieval commanders who relied on foraging or local supplies to feed their armies, Timur planned his campaigns years in advance. His agents would plant crops in regions he intended to invade, storing supplies in hidden depots and establishing networks of informants who could provide intelligence about local conditions. This long-term planning extended to his recruitment policies as well. Rather than relying solely on tribal levies, Timur maintained a professional corps of career soldiers who trained constantly and formed the backbone of his military system. Around this corps, he could rapidly assemble larger forces by calling upon tribal allies, recruiting from conquered territories, and employing mercenaries attracted by his reputation for success. The diversity of his army was both a strength and a potential weakness, much like Bayezid's forces. Timur's ranks included traditional Central Asian horse archers, but also Persian infantry, Arab cavalry, Indian war elephants, and even some European mercenaries who had entered his service after being captured in various campaigns. Managing such a diverse force required exceptional organizational skills and a clear command structure that could coordinate the actions of units with very different capabilities and cultural backgrounds. As Timur prepared for his confrontation with the Ottomans, he was drawing upon 4 decades of military experience and the resources of an empire that stretched from the borders of China to the shores of the Mediterranean. His army represented the culmination of everything he had learned about warfare, incorporating tactical innovations from every enemy he had defeated and every ally he had recruited. Intelligence reports had given him a detailed picture of Ottoman capabilities. He knew about the Janissary corps and their reputation for discipline and effectiveness. He understood the quality of Ottoman cavalry and the organizational advantages that came from the empire's centralized military system. Most importantly, he had identified the potential weaknesses in Bayezid's forces, the questionable loyalty of recently conquered troops, the Ottoman army's dependence on fixed supply lines, and their inexperience in fighting against truly large-scale nomadic forces. But Timur's greatest advantage lay not in superior numbers or better equipment. It lay in his understanding of how to fight a battle before the armies even made contact. While Bayezid was still assembling his forces for the march eastward, Timurid agents were already working to prepare the battlefield in ways that would neutralize Ottoman advantages and maximize the effectiveness of Central Asian tactics. The site of the coming battle, the plain of Çubuk near Ankara, had been chosen not by chance but through careful analysis of the terrain and its tactical possibilities. Timur's engineers had spent weeks studying the local topography, identifying water sources, measuring the capacity of streams, and calculating the earth-moving requirements for their planned modifications to the battlefield. What they were planning was ambitious, even by the standards of Timur's previous campaigns. They intended to literally reshape the battlefield, turning natural features into weapons and transforming what appeared to be open ground suitable for traditional cavalry combat into a carefully prepared killing field that would favor Timurid tactics and neutralize Ottoman advantages. The weapon they were preparing would be invisible to casual observation, but devastating in its effects. It would exploit the most basic human need while demonstrating the highest levels of military engineering. And it would prove that in medieval warfare, victory often went not to the bravest soldiers or the finest equipment, but to the commander who best understood how to use the battlefield itself as a weapon. As both armies converged on Ankara in the blazing heat of the Anatolian summer, Timur's secret weapon was already being deployed. The fate of 2 empires would be decided not by the clash of cavalry or the courage of infantry, but by the quiet work of engineers who understood that in warfare, water could be more powerful than steel. Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. The summer of 1402 settles over Anatolia like a furnace, with temperatures soaring well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, when shade can be found. This is the kind of heat that tests the endurance of even the most hardened soldiers, the kind of weather that makes water more precious than gold and turns every mile of marching into an ordeal of survival. Across this baking landscape, 2 of the most powerful armies in the world are converging on a relatively small city that most Europeans have never heard of, Ankara. The irony is not lost on contemporary observers that this dusty trading post, known to the Romans as Ankara and famous primarily for the soft wool of its goats, is about to become the stage for one of the most consequential battles in world history. Bayezid's army is the first to feel the full weight of the Anatolian summer. The Ottoman forces have been on the march for weeks, having abandoned their siege of Constantinople in response to reports of Timur's advance. As they move eastward, the very landscape seems to conspire against them. The roads, baked hard by the relentless sun, throw up clouds of dust that coat everything in a fine, choking powder. Water sources, already scarce in this arid region, seemed to be drying up faster than usual. You can imagine the condition of these troops as they struggle through the heat. The Janissaries, normally immaculate in their white felt caps and blue robes, now gray with dust and dark with sweat. The Serbian heavy cavalry, encased in steel plate armor that provides excellent protection, but turns their bodies into ovens under the blazing sun. The Turkish sipahi, more accustomed to this climate, but still suffering from the unusual intensity of the heat and the grueling pace of the march. What the Ottoman commanders don't realize is that their ordeal is not entirely due to natural causes. Timur's agents have been active throughout the region for months, poisoning wells, diverting streams, and ensuring that every water source along the Ottoman line of march is either contaminated or insufficient to meet the needs of a large army. This is psychological warfare at its most subtle, creating conditions that will weaken enemy morale without revealing the hand behind the suffering. Meanwhile, Timur's forces are approaching from a different direction entirely, having taken a circuitous route that avoids the worst effects of the heat and keeps them within reach of reliable water sources. This isn't luck. It's the result of careful planning that began months before the campaign officially started. Timur's engineers have been surveying the region, identifying the best routes for large-scale troop movement and establishing supply caches at strategic locations. The contrast between the two armies' experiences during the approach to Ankara reveals much about their different military philosophies. Bayezid, confident in the superiority of his forces and eager to bring Timur to battle, has chosen the most direct route possible. His thinking reflects the Ottoman preference for decisive action. Locate the enemy, close with them as quickly as possible, and settle the matter through superior fighting ability. Timur, on the other hand, views the march to battle as part of the battle itself. Every mile his enemies travel under adverse conditions is a victory for his forces. Every day that passes allows his intelligence network to gather more information about Ottoman capabilities and intentions. Every hour of preparation gives his engineers more time to prepare the battlefield in ways that will maximize his advantages. As the Ottoman army approaches Ankara, advance scouts begin reporting disturbing news. A city is under siege, but not in the way that Bayezid expected. Rather than surrounding Ankara with a traditional siege line, Timur appears to have positioned his forces to control the surrounding countryside while leaving several escape routes open. It's an unusual tactical arrangement that suggests either supreme confidence or some kind of elaborate trap. What the scouts do and report, because they do and recognize its significance, is the extensive engineering work that has been taking place around the city. Teams of workers, seemingly engaged in routine construction projects, have actually been carrying out a complex plan to reshape the local water systems. Small dams have been built across streams, channels have been dug to redirect water flow, and what appears to be a new irrigation system is actually a sophisticated mechanism for controlling access to the region's most vital resource. The genius of this engineering project lies in its subtlety. To casual observation, the modifications to the local landscape appear to be improvements: new channels to manage seasonal flooding, reinforced riverbanks to prevent erosion, and storage basins to conserve water during dry periods. Only someone with a detailed understanding of hydraulic engineering would recognize that these improvements have been designed to serve a very different purpose. As Bayezid's forces draw closer to their destination, the Sultan himself begins to sense that something is wrong. His scouts report that Timur's army appears to be smaller than expected, perhaps only 80,000 to 90,000 men rather than the 140,000 that intelligence had suggested. Either the reports were exaggerated, or significant portions of the enemy force are not visible from the available observation points. The explanation, when it finally becomes clear, reveals the sophistication of Timur's planning. Rather than concentrating his entire army in one location, He has dispersed his forces across multiple camps positioned to control key terrain features and transportation routes. This deployment accomplishes several objectives simultaneously. It makes accurate counting of his forces difficult. It allows him to control a much larger area than would be possible with a concentrated army, and it positions different units to respond to Ottoman movements from multiple directions. But the most important element of Timur's deployment is invisible to Ottoman observers: the positioning of his engineering units and the equipment they need to execute their plan. Hidden in camps scattered throughout the region are the tools and materials needed for rapid, large-scale earth-moving: shovels, baskets, ropes, and most importantly, the skilled workers who know exactly how to use them. The final approach to Ankara tests the endurance of both armies, but in very different ways. For the Ottomans, it represents the culmination of weeks of forced marching under increasingly difficult conditions. Water has become scarce, supplies are running low, and the men are exhausted from the combination of heat, dust, and uncertainty about what awaits them. For Timur's forces, the approach represents the beginning of the final phase of a carefully orchestrated plan. As Ottoman scouts probe closer to their positions, Timurid engineers begin the last preparations for their secret weapon. The work must be completed under cover of darkness, carried out with sufficient stealth to avoid detection, but executed with enough speed to be ready when battle is joined. The site of the coming battle, the plain of Çubuk, appears to be ideal terrain for the kind of large-scale cavalry combat that both armies prefer. The ground is relatively flat and open, providing room for maneuver and clear lines of sight. The only significant terrain features are a small stream that meanders across the battlefield, and a few low hills that might provide tactical advantages to whichever force controls them. But this apparently simple battlefield is about to be transformed into something much more complex and deadly. The stream that appears to be just another minor terrain feature is actually the key to Timur's entire strategy. Within hours, this small waterway will become the weapon that decides the fate of two empires. As both armies settle into their positions for what promises to be one of the greatest battles of the medieval period, few soldiers on either side understand that the outcome is already being determined by the quiet work of engineers operating under cover of darkness. The secret weapon that will destroy Ottoman power requires no exotic metals, no revolutionary new tactics, and no supernatural intervention. It requires only shovels, earth, and a kind of engineering skill that comes from understanding how to turn the very landscape into an instrument of war. Chapter 5: The Art of Water Warfare. As darkness falls over the plain of Çubuk on the night of July 27, 1402, most of the soldiers in both armies are settling down for what they expect will be their last night before battle. Weapons are sharpened one final time, prayers are offered to various gods, and veterans share advice with younger soldiers who have never faced combat on this scale. But while the armies sleep, a small group of Timurid engineers is putting the finishing touches on what will prove to be the most decisive weapon in the coming battle. The Çubuk stream, whose name literally means small branch, in Turkish, appears to be nothing more than a minor geographical feature, a shallow waterway that meanders across the battlefield without seeming to offer significant tactical advantages to either side. It's perhaps 3 feet deep at its deepest point, maybe 10 feet wide in most places, and flows at a gentle pace that would allow infantry to cross easily and pose no obstacle to cavalry charges. But Timur's engineers have been studying this stream for weeks, measuring its flow rate, calculating its capacity, and most importantly, identifying the perfect location for their planned intervention. What they've discovered is that the Çubuk's modest appearance conceals the potential for devastating modification. The stream's path across the battlefield can be altered, its flow can be controlled, and most crucially, it can be diverted away from areas where the Ottoman army will need it most. To understand the weapon that's being prepared, we need to understand the science behind what military engineers call hydro warfare, the use of water systems as instruments of military strategy. This isn't a new concept in 1402. Armies have been manipulating water supplies for thousands of years. The Assyrians diverted rivers to flood enemy cities. The Romans built elaborate aqueduct systems, partly to ensure their armies had reliable water supplies. Persian engineers had perfected techniques for controlling irrigation systems that could make or break entire regions. But Timur's engineers are planning something more sophisticated than simply cutting off water supplies. They are preparing to create an off-stream reservoir system that will allow them to control when and where water becomes available on the battlefield. The technique they're using has been perfected through generations of irrigation engineering in Central Asia, where the management of scarce water resources can determine the survival of entire communities. The first component of their system is a diversion dam built across the Çubuk stream at a carefully chosen location upstream from the main battlefield. This dam doesn't need to be large or permanent. It just needs to be capable of temporarily redirecting the stream's flow when the time comes. The engineering is remarkably simple: a low earth and stone barrier with a gap that can be quickly closed using pre-positioned materials. The second component is more complex: an off-stream reservoir constructed in a natural depression about half a mile west of the main battlefield. This reservoir has been carefully excavated to maximize its storage capacity while remaining invisible to casual observation. From a distance, it appears to be nothing more than a natural low-lying area, but it is actually a sophisticated water storage system capable of holding the entire flow of the Çubuk stream for several hours. The third component is the canal system that connects the diversion dam to the off-stream reservoir. This canal has been dug to look like a natural drainage feature, following the contours of the land to minimize its visibility while ensuring adequate flow capacity. The engineering requirements are precise. The canal must be deep enough to carry the stream's full flow, but not so obvious as to attract attention from enemy scouts. What makes this system particularly ingenious is its timing mechanism. Under normal circumstances, the Çubuk stream flows past the diversion dam, through the gap left open by the engineers, and continues along its natural course across the battlefield. Ottoman scouts observing the area see exactly what they expect to see: a small stream following its normal path, providing water for troops, horses, and camp followers. But when the signal is given, probably shortly after battle is joined, Timurid engineers will close the gap in the diversion dam, redirecting the stream's entire flow into the canal system and ultimately into the off-stream reservoir. The effect on the battlefield will be immediate and devastating. The portion of the stream that flows past the Ottoman positions will quickly become a dry creek bed. The psychological impact of this water diversion will be as important as its physical effects. Soldiers who have been counting on access to the stream for drinking water will suddenly find themselves facing the prospect of fighting a major battle without adequate hydration. In the blazing heat of an Anatolian summer, with temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the threat of dehydration becomes a weapon more feared than enemy cavalry. But the engineering challenge involved in this project is enormous. Moving enough earth to create an effective diversion system requires thousands of man-hours of labor, most of which must be completed without attracting enemy attention. The workers must operate primarily at night, using hand tools that won't create excessive noise, and they must be prepared to camouflage their work during daylight hours. Timur's solution to this challenge reveals the sophistication of his logistical planning. Rather than using his regular soldiers for this engineering work, he has brought with him thousands of skilled laborers recruited from across his empire. These aren't just common workers. They're specialists in irrigation engineering, dam construction, and hydraulic systems management. Many have been involved in major construction projects in Samarkand and other Timurid cities. The tools they're using represent the cutting edge of medieval engineering technology. Their shovels are designed specifically for rapid earth moving, with blade shapes optimized for different soil conditions. Their baskets are woven to carry maximum loads while remaining light enough for rapid transport. Most importantly, they have measuring devices that allow them to calculate water flow rates, reservoir capacity, and channel dimensions with remarkable precision. The timing of this engineering project has been coordinated with other elements of Timur's battle plan. While his engineers work on the water diversion system, other units are positioning themselves to take maximum advantage of the chaos that will result when the Ottoman army suddenly finds itself without access to water. Timurid cavalry forces are positioned to exploit gaps that will open in Ottoman lines when troops are forced to abandon their positions in search of alternative water sources. Perhaps most cleverly, Timur has positioned his own water supplies to remain unaffected by the diversion. His forces have access to wells, springs, and stored water that will keep them supplied throughout the battle. The contrast between thirsty Ottoman troops and well-hydrated Timurid warriors will become increasingly important as the day progresses and the heat takes its toll on both armies. The secrecy surrounding this engineering project has been maintained through a combination of careful planning and deliberate misdirection. Ottoman scouts observing Timurid positions see engineering work taking place, but it appears to be routine camp construction. Building fortifications, digging latrines, and creating defensive positions. They don't recognize that what they re-observing is actually the preparation of the most sophisticated water warfare system ever deployed in medieval combat. As dawn approaches on July 28, 1402, the final preparations are being completed. The diversion dam is ready to be activated. The canal system has been tested and proven functional, and the off-stream reservoir has been prepared to receive the full flow of the Çubuk stream. Thousands of soldiers are about to participate in one of the largest battles of the medieval period, but the outcome is already being determined by a few hundred engineers, armed with nothing more sophisticated than shovels and an intimate understanding of hydraulic engineering. The weapon that will destroy the Ottoman army isn't made of steel or powered by gunpowder. It's made of earth and stone, powered by gravity and the simple fact that human beings cannot survive without water. In a few hours, this humble stream will become the instrument that reshapes the political map of the Eastern Mediterranean and demonstrates that in warfare, the most devastating weapons are often the most unexpected ones. The secret weapon is ready. Now it's time to see if engineering can triumph over courage, if careful planning can overcome superior numbers, and if the mastery of water can prove more powerful than the mastery of war. Chapter 6. Dawn of Destruction. The first light of July 28, 1402, creeps across the plain of Çubuk like the pale glow of a forge beginning to heat up for the day's work. Within hours, this quiet landscape will be transformed into one of the most brutal battlefields in medieval history. But for now, there is an almost ethereal calm as both armies complete their final preparations. Bayezid rises before dawn, as has been his custom throughout his military career. The Sultan's tent, magnificent even by the standards of medieval warfare, stands at the center of the Ottoman camp like a silk and gold testament to the empire as wealth and power. But inside, Bayezid's thoughts are focused entirely on the practical matters of battle, deployment, timing, and the crucial question of where and how to engage an enemy whose tactical capabilities remain largely unknown. Through the early morning mist, he can see the Ottoman army spreading across the battlefield in formations that represent decades of military evolution. In the center, his elite Janissary corps forms a solid block of disciplined infantry, their distinctive white felt caps and blue uniforms making them easily identifiable even at a distance. These are perhaps the finest foot soldiers in the world, trained from childhood in the use of composite bows, crossbows, and the new firearms that are beginning to change the nature of warfare. On the right wing, Stefan Lazarević positions his Serbian heavy cavalry, men whose reputation for courage and skill has spread throughout Europe. These knights wear the finest plate armor that European metallurgy can produce. and they ride destriers bred specifically for shock combat. Their lances are tipped with steel points, capable of penetrating almost any armor, and their swords are forged according to techniques that represent centuries of weaponsmithing tradition. The left wing is commanded by Prince Suleiman, Bayezid's eldest son, who has proven his military capabilities in campaigns throughout the Balkans. Under his command are the finest Ottoman sipahi cavalry, heavy horsemen whose equipment combines the best elements of European and Asian military traditions. These are men from established military families, fighting for honor, glory, and the promise of land grants that will secure their descendants' futures. But it's the center of the Ottoman line that reveals both the strength and the potential weakness of Bayezid's military system. Alongside the elite Janissaries are contingents of recently conquered Tatars, Turkmen cavalry from recently absorbed Emirates, and various auxiliary units whose loyalty depends more on Ottoman success than on deep-rooted allegiance to the Sultan. In a victorious army, such diversity represents strength through the combination of different military traditions. In a struggling army, it can become a source of catastrophic weakness. As the sun rises higher, the true scale of both armies becomes visible across the battlefield. Contemporary estimates vary wildly. Some sources claim Timur commanded as many as 800,000 men, but numbers alone don't tell the complete story. Timur's army represents the culmination of 40 years of continuous warfare and conquest. His core units are veterans who have participated in campaigns from Delhi to Damascus, men who have learned to fight effectively against every type of enemy and in every kind of terrain. They've developed the kind of unit cohesion and tactical flexibility that only comes from shared experience in countless battles. The composition of Timur's forces reflects the multi-ethnic nature of his empire, but unlike the Ottoman army, these diverse units have been welded together through years of campaigning. Central Asian horse archers form the backbone of his forces, but they're supported by Persian infantry, Arab cavalry, captured Indian war elephants, and even siege engineers recruited from Chinese territories. Each unit has been trained to work in coordination with the others, creating a military machine of remarkable sophistication and effectiveness. As both armies complete their deployment, the stage is set for what promises to be one of the great military encounters of the medieval period. But unknown to the thousands of soldiers preparing for battle, the outcome is already being determined by factors that have nothing to do with courage, skill, or military tradition. Timur's engineers have spent the night making final adjustments to their water diversion system. The diversion dam is ready for activation. The canal system has been tested one final time, and the off-stream reservoir stands ready to receive the entire flow of the Çubuk stream. Most importantly, the timing of the water diversion has been coordinated with other elements of Timur's battle plan to maximize its psychological and tactical impact. The genius of this system lies not just in its engineering sophistication, but in its perfect integration with traditional steppe warfare tactics. When the water diversion takes effect, it will force Ottoman units to abandon their carefully prepared positions in search of alternative water sources. This movement will create gaps in the Ottoman line that Timurid cavalry can exploit using the mobility and archery skills that have made them legendary throughout Central Asia. But perhaps most importantly, the water diversion will solve one of the fundamental challenges of medieval battle management: how to disrupt enemy formations without suffering heavy casualties in direct assault. Rather than charging directly into Ottoman lines, defended by disciplined Janissary infantry and heavy cavalry, Timur's forces will be able to attack an enemy that has already been weakened and disorganized by thirst and the desperate search for water. As the morning progresses and the heat begins to build, both armies complete their final preparations. Weapons are checked one last time, prayers are offered to various gods, and commanders issue final instructions to their subordinates. But while these traditional pre-battle rituals take place, a very different kind of preparation is reaching its climax. Timur himself, takes personal command of the water diversion operation, positioning himself where he can observe both the progress of the engineering work and the deployment of Ottoman forces. This isn't just a tactical decision, it is a statement about the importance he places on this unconventional weapon. By personally supervising the water diversion, he's signaling to his subordinates that this engineering project is as crucial to victory as traditional military tactics. The first test of the system comes when Timur's engineers conduct a brief trial run, temporarily closing the diversion dam to ensure that water can be redirected into the canal system as planned. The test is successful. Within minutes, the flow of the Çubuk stream past the Ottoman positions noticeably decreases. More importantly, the off-stream reservoir begins filling at the expected rate, confirming that the calculations made during the planning phase were accurate. But the most crucial element of the water diversion system is its reversibility. If something goes wrong with Timur's battle plan, or if the Ottomans prove more adaptable than expected, the engineers can quickly restore normal water flow by reopening the diversion dam. This flexibility means that the water diversion enhances Timur's tactical options without creating irreversible commitments that might prove disadvantageous if circumstances change. As the sun reaches its zenith and the heat becomes truly oppressive, both armies are positioned for battle. But while Ottoman troops are beginning to feel the effects of limited water access and the stress of operating in extreme heat, Timurid forces remain well hydrated and ready for action. The contrast between the two armies' conditions is not yet dramatic, but it's already beginning to affect morale and combat readiness. The stage is set for battle, but the outcome has already begun to be determined by a weapon that most of the participants don't even recognize as a weapon. In a few hours, thousands of soldiers will charge across this battlefield, displaying courage and skill that will be remembered for centuries. But the real story of this battle is not about the bravery of individual warriors. It is about the triumph of engineering over tradition, planning over improvisation, and the devastating effectiveness of fighting the battle before the battle begins. The secret weapon is ready to be deployed. The only question remaining is whether Bayezid and his commanders will recognize what is happening to them before it is too late to respond effectively. Chapter 7. The trap springs at 10 o'clock in the morning on July 28, 1402, with the sun already blazing down on the plain of Çubuk, and the temperature climbing toward what will become a scorching 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Sultan Bayezid gives the order that will seal the fate of his empire. Mounted on his magnificent warhorse and surrounded by his elite guard, he raises his ceremonial mace high above his head, the signal for the Ottoman army to begin its advance. The sight is magnificent and terrible. 85,000 warriors moving forward in carefully coordinated formations that represent the pinnacle of medieval military organization. The Janissary corps advances in the center. Their disciplined ranks maintain perfect formation despite the broken ground and the clouds of dust raised by thousands of marching feet. Their composite bows are strung and ready, arrows nocked, while their supporting crossbowmen and early firearm units provide additional ranged capability. On the flanks, the cavalry begins its advance with the measured pace that will build to a thunderous charge. Stefan Lazarevic's Serbian knights move forward on the right, their plate armor gleaming in the sunlight, their lances creating a forest of steel points. On the left, Prince Suleiman's sipahi cavalry advance with the easy confidence of men who have never known defeat. Their horses bred for battle and their weapons representing the finest that Ottoman smiths can produce. But what the advancing Ottoman army doesn't realize is that their enemy has been waiting for exactly this moment. As soon as Ottoman troops begin moving away from their initial positions near the Çubuk stream, Timur gives a subtle hand signal to his chief engineer. It's time to spring the trap that has been months in the making. The activation of the water diversion system is almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. A few dozen workers with shovels quickly move the pre-positioned earth and stones that have been keeping the diversion dam open. Within minutes, the entire flow of the Çubuk stream is redirected into the canal system, leaving the original stream increasingly dry as the stored water drains away. At first, the effects are subtle enough that most soldiers on both sides don't notice what's happening. The Ottoman advance continues according to plan, with different units maintaining coordination and responding appropriately to Timurid movements. But as the morning progresses and the heat continues to build, the absence of readily available water begins to have increasingly serious consequences. The first Ottoman units to feel the effects are the Janissary corps in the center of the line. These elite infantry have been trained to maintain formation under the most extreme conditions, but they're also carrying heavy equipment and wearing relatively thick clothing that provides protection but retains heat. As they advance across the open ground under the blazing sun, their water requirements increase dramatically. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't present a significant problem. Medieval armies were accustomed to fighting in hot weather, and experienced soldiers knew how to pace themselves and conserve their energy during extended combat. But the Çubuk stream, which should have provided a readily accessible source of water for refilling water skins and cooling overheated troops, is now little more than a series of stagnant pools rapidly disappearing under the intense heat. The psychological impact of this discovery is perhaps even more important than its immediate physical effects. Ottoman soldiers who had been counting on access to the stream for water suddenly find themselves facing the prospect of fighting a major battle without adequate hydration. In the brutal heat of an Anatolian summer, this isn't just an inconvenience, it's a potential death sentence. But Timur's water diversion achieves much more than simply denying water to enemy troops. By forcing Ottoman units to abandon their carefully prepared positions in search of alternative water sources, it creates exactly the kind of tactical confusion that Timurid forces are trained to exploit. As Ottoman formations begin to break up and individual units start moving in different directions, gaps appear in what had been a solid defensive line. This is where Timur's tactical genius becomes fully apparent. Rather than launching an immediate all-out assault, he uses his cavalry to probe these gaps, testing Ottoman responses and gradually increasing pressure on the most vulnerable points. His horse archers begin raining arrows on Ottoman units that have become separated from their supporting forces, while his heavy cavalry positions itself to exploit any major breakthrough that might develop. The speed with which the Ottoman position deteriorates is remarkable and terrifying. What had been a confident, well-organized army just hours earlier is rapidly becoming a collection of increasingly desperate units, struggling to maintain cohesion while dealing with the twin challenges of enemy pressure and their own growing thirst. The first major crack in Ottoman resistance comes on the left wing, where Prince Suleiman's forces include a significant number of recently conquered Tatars. These troops have always been somewhat questionable in their loyalty, held in Ottoman service more by the promise of plunder than by deep allegiance to the Sultan. As the tactical situation deteriorates and it becomes clear that the Ottomans are facing serious difficulties, these Tatar units begin to reconsider their allegiances. What happens next is one of the most devastating betrayals in military history. Rather than fighting to hold their positions against Timurid attacks, the Tatar cavalry units suddenly switch sides, turning their weapons against their former Ottoman allies and opening massive gaps in the Ottoman line. This treachery isn't just a matter of individual units changing sides. It is a coordinated defection that has clearly been planned in advance. The revelation that Timur has been secretly negotiating with Ottoman Tatar units adds another layer to his sophisticated pre-battle planning. While his engineers were preparing the water diversion system, his diplomatic agents were working to undermine enemy unit cohesion through bribery, threats, and appeals to ethnic loyalty. The combination of these two unconventional weapons, engineering and espionage, proves far more effective than traditional military tactics. With his left wing collapsing and enemy cavalry pouring through the gaps created by Tatar defections, Bayezid faces a crisis that threatens to destroy his entire army. But rather than ordering a general retreat, he makes the decision that reveals both his courage and his strategic limitations. He chooses to personally lead his remaining forces in a desperate attempt to break through Timurid lines and reach the water sources that his army desperately needs. The charge that follows is everything that medieval military tradition celebrates. Thousands of elite warriors displaying supreme courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The remaining Janissary units advance with the disciplined determination that has made them legendary, while Stefan Lazarević's Serbian knights launch a series of thunderous cavalry charges that temporarily break through Timurid lines and create hope for Ottoman victory. But courage and skill can only accomplish so much against careful planning and superior numbers. As the Ottoman attack develops, Timur's forces respond with the flexibility and coordination that comes from years of fighting together. His horse archers use their superior mobility to avoid direct confrontation while raining arrows on Ottoman formations. His heavy cavalry strikes at precisely the right moments to maximum effect, and his war elephants create terror and confusion in Ottoman ranks unaccustomed to fighting such exotic opponents. Perhaps most devastatingly, the water diversion continues to take its toll throughout the battle. As the fighting intensifies and the heat builds, Ottoman troops become increasingly desperate for water. Individual soldiers begin abandoning their units to search for alternative water sources, and unit commanders face impossible choices between maintaining formation and allowing their men to seek the hydration they need to continue fighting. The combination of thirst, betrayal, and enemy pressure proves too much for even the finest military force to overcome. By mid-afternoon, the Ottoman army is in full retreat, with thousands of soldiers either killed, captured, or scattered across the Anatolian countryside. Sultan Bayezid himself, wounded and exhausted, attempts to escape with a small group of loyal followers. But Timur's cavalry has anticipated this possibility and positioned units to cut off all escape routes. The capture of Bayezid represents the completion of Timur's victory, but it's also a demonstration of how thoroughly his unconventional weapons have achieved their objectives. The Sultan, who had never known defeat, has been brought down not by superior courage or better equipment, but by careful planning, engineering skill, and the devastating effectiveness of turning the battlefield itself into a weapon. The secret weapon has achieved everything its creators hoped for and more. The Ottoman Empire, which had seemed on the verge of dominating the Eastern Mediterranean, now faces civil war and potential dissolution. And all because a few engineers with shovels understood how to make water more powerful than steel. Chapter 8. The Broken Thunderbolt. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon on July 28, 1402, the plain of Çubuk presents a scene that will haunt military historians for centuries to come. What had been one of the most powerful armies in the medieval world just hours earlier is now scattered across miles of dusty ground, leaving behind the debris of defeat. Broken weapons, abandoned banners, and thousands of dead and wounded warriors whose courage couldn't overcome careful planning and engineering skill. Sultan Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt, sits motionless on his exhausted horse somewhere in the foothills southeast of the battlefield, surrounded by perhaps 300 of his most loyal followers. For the first time in his 37-year military career, the first time since he was a young prince learning warfare at his father's side, he has tasted defeat. But this isn't just any defeat. It is a catastrophe so complete that it threatens the very existence of the empire he has spent 13 years building. The Sultan's physical condition reflects the devastation of his army. His magnificent ceremonial armor is dented and stained with dust and blood, some his own, some from enemies he personally fought during the desperate final stages of the battle. His famous warhorse, bred from the finest bloodlines in Anatolia, trembles with exhaustion and dehydration. Most telling of all, his water skin hangs empty at his side, a mute testament to the weapon that has destroyed Ottoman power. Around him, the survivors of his personal guard tell a story of courage in the face of impossible odds. These are men who have followed Bayezid through a dozen campaigns, who have seen him lead charges against Hungarian knights and Serbian warriors, who have watched him transform the Ottoman Empire from a regional power into one of the great military forces of the world. But even their legendary loyalty cannot overcome the simple biological fact that human beings cannot fight effectively without water. The collapse of Ottoman resistance has been both sudden and total. Stefan Lazarević, Bayezid's Serbian brother-in-law, managed to extract his heavy cavalry from the battlefield in relatively good order, but only after suffering horrific casualties and abandoning any hope of supporting the Ottoman center. Prince Suleiman, commanding the left wing, disappeared somewhere in the chaos following the Tatar defections. Whether he's dead, captured, or simply lost among the thousands of fleeing soldiers remains unknown. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of the Ottoman defeat is what it reveals about the fragility of their military system. The army that seemed so formidable in the morning proved to be held together more by success and momentum than by deep structural bonds. When faced with their first serious reverse, units that had fought loyally for years suddenly began to disintegrate. Their loyalty depended on continued victory rather than institutional strength. The Janissary corps, the elite infantry that formed the backbone of Ottoman military power, suffered particularly heavy casualties during the final phases of the battle. These men, trained from childhood to value death before dishonor, fought with desperate courage even as their tactical situation became hopeless. The training and discipline can only compensate for so much when troops are fighting without adequate water in extreme heat against superior numbers. As word of the Ottoman defeat spreads across the battlefield, the full scope of Timur's victory becomes apparent. This isn't just a tactical success, it is a strategic triumph that reshapes the entire political balance of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire, which had seemed on the verge of becoming the dominant power in the region, is suddenly reduced to a collection of competing factions struggling for survival. The immediate consequences of the battle extend far beyond the armies that fought it. News of Bayezid's defeat spreads rapidly throughout the region, carried by fleeing soldiers, traveling merchants, and the elaborate intelligence networks that connect medieval cities. The psychological impact of this news is enormous. The empire that had seemed invincible has been revealed to be vulnerable, and its enemies are quick to recognize the opportunities this creates. In Constantinople, Emperor Manuel II receives the news with a mixture of relief and calculation. The Ottoman siege that had threatened to finally end Byzantine resistance has been lifted, but the emperor understands that this reprieve is temporary. Timur has no interest in permanent conquest. His forces will eventually return to Central Asia, leaving behind a power vacuum that will need to be filled. The question is whether the Byzantines can use this breathing space to rebuild their strength, or whether other powers will move to fill the gap left by Ottoman weakness. Throughout the Balkans, Christian kingdoms that have been forced to accept Ottoman suzerainty begin to reconsider their positions. Serbian princes who had fought loyally for Bayezid now faced the delicate task of determining how to respond to their overlord's defeat. Bulgarian and Albanian leaders who had submitted to Ottoman authority wonder whether this might be the moment to reassert their independence. But perhaps the most immediate concern for the scattered survivors of the Ottoman army is the fate of their sultan. Bayezid's capture, when it finally occurs, represents not just a personal tragedy, but a constitutional crisis that threatens to tear the empire apart. Unlike many medieval monarchies, the Ottoman system depends heavily on the personal authority of the sultan. Without clear leadership, the empire's various components, Turkish Gazis, Balkan Christians, Anatolian bureaucrats, and recently conquered populations, lacked the institutional bonds necessary to maintain unity. The circumstances of Bayezid's capture reveal the thoroughness of Timur's planning. Rather than being taken during the heat of battle, the Sultan is surrounded and captured during his attempted escape, suggesting that Timurid forces had anticipated this possibility and positioned cavalry units to intercept fleeing Ottoman leaders. This isn't the result of battlefield improvisation. It is the execution of a predetermined plan designed to eliminate Ottoman leadership and maximize the political impact of military victory. Timur's treatment of his captive reveals both his political sophistication and his understanding of psychological warfare. Rather than immediately executing Bayezid, which would create a martyr and potentially rally Ottoman resistance, he keeps the fallen Sultan alive as a trophy and a tool of intimidation. The sight of the once mighty Thunderbolt reduced to captivity serves as a powerful demonstration of Timurid power and a warning to other potential enemies. But the psychological impact of Bayezid's captivity extends beyond its immediate propaganda value. Throughout the Islamic world, rulers are watching carefully to see how Timur treats his defeated rival. The precedent being set will influence diplomatic calculations throughout the region, as princes and sultans recalibrate their assessments of Timurid power and the wisdom of resistance versus submission. The fate of the Ottoman treasury and administrative apparatus adds another layer of complexity to the aftermath of the battle. Timur's forces have captured not just military supplies, but also the financial resources and administrative records that represent the accumulated wealth and organizational knowledge of the Ottoman state. This intellectual plunder is perhaps more valuable than gold or jewels, providing insights into Ottoman military organization, diplomatic relationships, and economic resources that will be useful for future campaigns. As night falls over the battlefield of Çubuk, the magnitude of the transformation that has occurred in a single day becomes clear. The Ottoman Empire, which began the day as one of the great powers of the medieval world, has been reduced to a collection of competing factions struggling for survival. The Timurid Empire, already the largest in the world, has demonstrated that it can defeat any enemy and reshape the political landscape at will. But perhaps most importantly, the Battle of Ankara has demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of unconventional weapons when deployed by a commander who understands how to integrate engineering, diplomacy, and traditional military tactics into a comprehensive strategy. The secret weapon that destroyed Ottoman power wasn't just the water diversion, it was the entire system of careful planning, psychological warfare, and tactical innovation that made such engineering possible. The Thunderbolt has been broken, but the storm that broke him represents something new in medieval warfare: the triumph of systematic planning over individual courage, engineering over tradition, and the devastating power of fighting the battle before the battle begins. The plain of Çubuk will be remembered not just as the site of Ottoman defeat, but as the place where medieval warfare itself began to evolve into something recognizably modern. Chapter 9. The Ripple Effect. The news travels faster than armies could march in 1402, spreading across trade routes and diplomatic networks with the speed that only catastrophic events can achieve. Within days of the Battle of Ankara, merchants in Damascus are discussing the implications for their trade routes. Within weeks, diplomats in Paris and London are recalculating the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Within months, the entire political landscape of Europe and Asia has been transformed by a single day's fighting on a dusty plain in central Anatolia. The immediate aftermath of Timur's victory reveals the sophistication of his strategic planning. Rather than pursuing the scattered remnants of the Ottoman army or attempting to occupy Ottoman territories, he makes a series of calculated moves designed to maximize the long-term impact of his success. This isn't the random destruction of a victorious conqueror. It is the careful implementation of a comprehensive strategy for reshaping regional power relationships. The first target of Timur's post-battle operations is the Ottoman capital of Bursa, a wealthy city that represents both the economic heart of the empire and its symbolic center. The siege and capture of Bursa demonstrates everything that makes Timurid military operations so effective: speed, organization, and the integration of psychological warfare with conventional tactics. But Timur's treatment of Bursa reveals his understanding that different types of victories require different approaches. Unlike his treatment of cities that had resisted his initial advances, Bursa is not destroyed. Instead, it's systematically looted of its most valuable resources: gold, silver, precious stones, skilled craftsmen, and scholarly manuscripts, which are then transported back to Samarkand to enrich Tabadal. This selective approach to conquest serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates that submission to Timurid authority brings relative mercy, encouraging other cities to surrender without resistance. It maximizes the economic benefits of victory by preserving infrastructure and productive capacity while extracting portable wealth. Most importantly, it sends a clear message about the temporary nature of Timur's presence in Anatolia. He is here to defeat the Ottomans and extract tribute, not to establish permanent rule. The psychological impact of this approach extends throughout the region. Cities that might have prepared for desperate siege warfare instead begin calculating the costs and benefits of resistance versus submission. The result is a cascade of surrenders that allows Timur's forces to control vast territories with minimal fighting, conserving strength for future campaigns while maximizing the psychological impact of Ottoman defeat. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire itself begins to fragment in ways that reveal the underlying tensions within Bayezid's creation. The empire that had seemed so unified under strong leadership proves to be held together more by fear and momentum than by institutional loyalty. As news of the Sultan's capture spreads, provincial governors begin making independent decisions about their own survival and advancement. Prince Suleiman, who survived the battle but lost most of his forces, establishes himself in the European territories around Adrianople and begins trying to rebuild Ottoman power on the west side of the Bosphorus. Prince Mehmed, commanding the rear guard during the battle and thus escaping the worst of the disaster, attempts to maintain control over remaining Ottoman territories in western Anatolia. Other Ottoman princes and generals stake out their own territorial claims, creating a complex civil war that will last for over a decade. This fragmentation of Ottoman power creates opportunities for other regional actors who have been waiting for exactly such a moment. The Byzantine Emperor Manuel II, despite commanding only a tiny remnant of his once great empire, suddenly finds himself courted by various Ottoman factions seeking legitimacy and support. Serbian and Bulgarian leaders who had been forced into Ottoman service begin to reconsider their options as the empire that had dominated them reveals its vulnerability. But perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of the Battle of Ankara is its impact on the broader development of military science. The devastating effectiveness of Timur's water diversion system doesn't go unnoticed by other military commanders. And within decades, similar techniques are being employed in conflicts throughout Europe and Asia. The battle also demonstrates the crucial importance of engineering capabilities in medieval warfare, encouraging investment in military engineering education and the development of more sophisticated siege and battlefield preparation techniques. The integration of engineering, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare that characterize Timur's approach begins to influence military thinking throughout the medieval world. For the Islamic world specifically, the Battle of Ankara represents a crucial turning point in the struggle between different visions of Islamic political organization. Timur's victory is seen by many as validation of traditional nomadic values over the settled, bureaucratic approach favored by the Ottomans. This ideological dimension of the conflict influences political developments throughout the region for generations. The economic consequences of the battle extend far beyond the immediate costs of military defeat. The disruption of Ottoman trade networks creates opportunities for competing commercial systems, while the tribute and plunder extracted by Timurid forces redistributes wealth on a massive scale. Cities like Venice and Genoa, which had established profitable trading relationships with the Ottomans, suddenly find themselves dealing with a completely different political and economic landscape. The technological implications of the battle are equally significant. Timur's demonstration of the effectiveness of systematic battlefield preparation encouraged the development of military engineering as a distinct scientific discipline. The water diversion technique itself is studied and copied, leading to innovations in hydraulic engineering that benefit both military and civilian applications. But perhaps the most profound consequence of the Battle of Ankara is its demonstration that careful planning and systematic preparation can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. The lesson that engineering skill and organizational capability can prove more decisive than individual courage or numerical superiority influences military thinking for centuries, contributing to the gradual evolution of warfare from medieval to early modern forms. The human cost of this transformation is enormous and often overlooked in discussions focused on political and military consequences. Thousands of soldiers who fought courageously at Ankara never return home, their families left to struggle with economic hardship and uncertainty. Entire communities that depended on Ottoman military patronage find themselves abandoned and vulnerable. The civil war that follows the battle creates additional suffering for civilian populations caught between competing Ottoman factions. Yet the battle also creates opportunities for individuals and communities that had been marginalized under Ottoman rule. Christian populations in the Balkans experience a temporary respite from Islamic pressure, while various Turkish tribes that had been subordinated by Ottoman expansion find new possibilities for independence and advancement. The diplomatic reverberations of the battle extend throughout Europe and Asia as rulers recalculate alliance systems and strategic priorities. The collapse of Ottoman power creates a vacuum that various powers attempt to fill, leading to a complex series of conflicts and negotiations that reshape international relationships for decades. For Timur himself, the victory at Ankara represents the culmination of a lifetime of military achievement, but it also poses new challenges. Having demonstrated his ability to defeat any enemy, he must now decide how to use his unprecedented power. The decision to withdraw from Anatolia, rather than attempting permanent occupation, reflects his understanding that even the greatest military victories are meaningless without sustainable political arrangements. The Battle of Ankara thus becomes a case study in both the possibilities and limitations of military power. Timur's victory is complete and devastating, but its long-term impact depends on factors beyond military capability. Economic relationships, cultural loyalties, and the complex dynamics of political legitimacy that determine whether temporary military success can be converted into lasting political change. As the immediate crisis of the battle gives way to longer-term political adjustments, it becomes clear that July 28, 1402 marks not just the defeat of one army by another, but a fundamental shift in the nature of power relationships throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and Central Asia. The secret weapon that destroyed the Ottoman Empire has proven to be more than just an engineering technique. It's a demonstration of how systematic thinking and careful preparation can reshape the world. Chapter 10. The Price of Victory. 2 years after his triumph at Ankara, Timur sits in his winter palace in Samarkand, surrounded by the fruits of a lifetime of conquest. The halls echo with the sound of craftsmen from a dozen different cultures working on projects that will make his capital the most beautiful city in the world. Persian poets compose verses celebrating his victories. Chinese astronomers calculate astrological charts for his campaigns, and Arab scholars translate texts that will advance human knowledge for centuries. But despite all this magnificence, Timur's thoughts often return to a dusty plain in Anatolia, where he achieved his greatest victory through the simple expedient of diverting a small stream. The Battle of Ankara has proven to be a turning point not just in his own career, but in the entire history of medieval warfare. Yet as he contemplates his legacy, the great conqueror understands that even the most brilliant military success carries within it the seeds of future challenges. The immediate consequences of his victory have exceeded even his most optimistic expectations. The Ottoman Empire, which had seemed on the verge of dominating the eastern Mediterranean, has fractured into competing factions that pose no threat to Timurid interests. The enormous treasury captured at Ankara has funded architectural projects and military campaigns that have further enhanced Timur's reputation. Most importantly, the psychological impact of defeating the invincible Ottomans has discouraged resistance throughout the region. But Timur is too experienced a ruler to be completely satisfied with even such spectacular success. The very completeness of his victory at Ankara has created new problems that require careful management. The Ottoman Empire, shattered though it may be, represents a useful counterweight to other regional powers. Its complete elimination might create opportunities for enemies that could prove more dangerous than the Ottomans ever were. The fate of the captured Sultan Bayezid illustrates the complex calculations involved in managing victory. Keeping the former Thunderbolt alive as a prisoner serves important propaganda purposes, demonstrating Timurid power to potential enemies throughout the region. But it also creates ongoing complications, as various Ottoman factions attempt to negotiate for their former leader's release, while foreign powers try to use Bayezid's captivity for their own diplomatic purposes. The psychological burden of holding such a distinguished prisoner weighs heavily on Timur himself. Despite his reputation for ruthlessness, he recognizes in Bayezid a kindred spirit, another ruler who has devoted his life to military conquest and empire building. The conversations between captor and captive, conducted during the long winter evenings in Samarkand, reveal the human dimension of their conflict that is often lost in accounts focused purely on military and political consequences. Bayezid's death in captivity 3 months after the battle removes one source of diplomatic complexity but creates others. The former sultan's demise, whether from natural causes, suicide, or something more sinister, eliminates the possibility of using him as a diplomatic bargaining chip while creating a martyr who might inspire future Ottoman resistance. The manner of his death becomes a subject of legend and speculation that influences Timur's reputation for generations. The long-term strategic implications of the Battle of Ankara forced Timur to confront fundamental questions about the nature and purpose of his empire. Unlike earlier nomadic conquerors who were content to extract tribute and move on, Timur has created an administrative system that requires ongoing attention and resources. The wealth captured from the Ottomans helps fund this system, but it also creates new obligations and vulnerabilities. The engineering techniques that proved so decisive at Ankara represent another double-edged aspect of Timur's legacy. The water diversion system has been studied and copied by military engineers throughout the known world, meaning that Timur's own forces might face similar tactics in future campaigns. More broadly, the battle has demonstrated the crucial importance of systematic preparation and engineering capability, encouraging the development of military science in ways that will eventually challenge traditional nomadic advantages. The human cost of Timur's victory extends far beyond the immediate casualties of the battle itself. The civil war that follows the collapse of Ottoman central authority creates years of suffering for civilian populations caught between competing factions. Cities are besieged, trade routes are disrupted, and agricultural communities are repeatedly plundered by armies whose loyalty shifts with the fortunes of war. Yet this suffering is not entirely without purpose or compensation. The temporary weakening of Ottoman power creates opportunities for communities that have been marginalized under Turkish rule. Christian populations in the Balkans experience a respite from Islamic pressure, while various ethnic groups find new possibilities for self-governance and cultural expression. The diplomatic consequences of the battle continue to reverberate throughout Europe and Asia long after the immediate military crisis has passed. The collapse of Ottoman power creates a vacuum that various nations attempt to fill, leading to a complex series of conflicts and negotiations that reshape international relationships for decades. European powers that had feared Ottoman expansion suddenly find themselves dealing with a completely different strategic landscape. For the Islamic world, the Battle of Ankara represents more than just a military defeat. It's a collision between different visions of Islamic political organization. Timur's victory is interpreted by many as a validation of traditional nomadic values over the settled, bureaucratic approach favored by the Ottomans. This ideological dimension of the conflict influences political developments throughout the region for generations. The technological legacy of the battle extends beyond military applications to civilian engineering projects. The hydraulic techniques developed for the water diversion system find applications in irrigation projects, urban water supply systems, and flood control measures throughout Central Asia and the Middle East. The integration of engineering and military planning pioneered by Timur's forces influences the development of what will eventually become known as military science. But perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of the Battle of Ankara is its demonstration that systematic planning and preparation can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. The lesson that engineering skill and organizational capability can prove more decisive than individual courage or numerical superiority becomes a fundamental principle of military thinking that influences warfare for centuries. As Timur contemplates his legacy from the comfort of his Samarkand palace, he understands that the secret weapon that destroyed Ottoman power was never really about water or engineering. It was about the systematic application of intelligence, planning, and innovation to overcome conventional military thinking. The stream that he diverted at Ankara was merely the physical manifestation of a much more profound transformation in the nature of warfare itself. The great conqueror's final years are spent not in further military campaigns, but in consolidating and organizing the empire he has created. The administrative systems developed for managing his vast territories, the architectural projects that beautify his cities, and the scholarly institutions that preserve and advance human knowledge all represent different aspects of the same systematic approach that proved so decisive at Ankara. When Timur dies in 1405, while preparing for a campaign against Ming China, he leaves behind an empire that stretches from the borders of India to the shores of the Mediterranean. But more importantly, he leaves behind a demonstration that careful planning, systematic preparation, and innovative thinking can overcome any obstacle. The secret weapon that destroyed the Ottoman Empire in Ankara was not just a military technique. It was a new way of thinking about power, conflict, and the possibilities of human achievement. The Battle of Ankara thus stands as a watershed moment in military history, marking the transition from medieval to early modern warfare and demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of systematic planning over traditional heroic values. The small stream that Timur diverted on a summer day in 1402 became the instrument that reshaped the political landscape of two continents and influenced the development of military science for centuries to come. The price of victory, it turns out, is not just measured in blood and treasure, but in the transformation of the victor himself and the world he sought to conquer. Chapter 11. Legacy of the Stream, 1,500 words. 5 centuries after the Battle of Ankara, military academies from West Point to Sandhurst study the campaign as a masterpiece of unconventional warfare. Staff officers pore over maps of the Çubuk Plain, analyzing the hydraulic engineering that transformed a minor geographical feature into the weapon that destroyed an empire. But the true legacy of Timur's secret weapon extends far beyond its immediate military applications, influencing the development of strategic thinking in ways that continue to shape conflicts in the modern world. The fundamental lesson of Ankara, that systematic preparation and innovative thinking can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds, has become a cornerstone of military doctrine. Every successful military campaign since 1402 can trace elements of its strategy back to principles first demonstrated on that dusty Anatolian battlefield. The integration of engineering, intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and conventional tactics that characterize Timur's approach has evolved into what modern strategists call full-spectrum warfare. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, the water diversion technique itself was rapidly adopted and adapted by military commanders throughout Europe and Asia. Within decades of Ankara, similar hydraulic warfare systems were being employed in conflicts from Italy to India. The siege of Constantinople in 1453, which finally ended the Byzantine Empire, included Ottoman attempts to use water diversions against the city's defenses, a bitter irony that would not have been lost on the descendants of those who fought at Ankara. But the broader strategic principles demonstrated at Ankara proved even more influential than the specific tactical innovations. The concept of preparing the battlefield, modifying terrain and conditions to favor one's own forces while disadvantaging the enemy became a standard element of military planning. Modern concepts like area denial and battlefield shaping can trace their intellectual ancestry directly back to Timur's engineers working by moonlight to redirect the Çubuk stream. The psychological warfare aspects of the Ankara campaign have had equally profound impacts on military thinking. Timur's understanding that battles can be won through careful manipulation of enemy morale and unit cohesion anticipated modern concepts of information warfare and hearts and minds campaigns. The pre-battle corruption of Ottoman Tatar units through bribery and ethnic appeals represents an early example of what intelligence services now call turning enemy assets. The Ottoman Empire's recovery from the disaster at Ankara provides another crucial element of the battle's legacy. The civil war that followed Bayezid's defeat, known as the Ottoman Interregnum, lasted for over a decade, but ultimately resulted in a stronger, more centralized empire under Mehmed I. The lessons learned from the catastrophe of 1402 influenced Ottoman military reforms that would make them one of the dominant powers in Europe for the next 2 centuries. The specific reforms implemented by the restored Ottoman Empire reveal how profoundly the Battle of Ankara influenced military thinking. The new Ottoman army placed much greater emphasis on logistics and supply, ensuring that their forces would never again be vulnerable to the kind of resource manipulation that had proven so devastating at Ankara. Engineering corps were expanded and professionalized. Water supplies were secured through multiple redundant systems, and intelligence gathering was systematized to prevent future strategic surprises. Perhaps most significantly, the Ottomans developed new approaches to managing the multi-ethnic composition of their forces. The betrayal of the Tatar units at Ankara had demonstrated the dangers of relying on recently conquered populations for military service. Subsequent Ottoman military organization placed much greater emphasis on the Janissary corps and other units whose loyalty was based on institutional rather than ethnic bonds. These Ottoman reforms, in turn, influenced military development throughout Europe. The success of the reorganized Ottoman army in conquering Constantinople and expanding into the Balkans forced European powers to reconsider their own military systems. The lessons of Ankara, filtered through Ottoman innovations, contributed to the military revolutions that characterized early modern European warfare. The engineering principles demonstrated at Ankara had equally profound impacts on civilian applications. The hydraulic techniques developed for military purposes found widespread use in agricultural and urban projects. Cities throughout the Middle East and Central Asia implemented water management systems based on innovations originally developed for battlefield applications. The integration of engineering and strategic planning pioneered by Timur's forces influenced everything from urban planning to industrial development. The intellectual legacy of the Battle of Ankara extends into academic and scholarly circles as well. The systematic study of the campaign has contributed to the development of military history as a scholarly discipline, while the interdisciplinary nature of Timur's approach has influenced thinking in fields ranging from engineering to psychology. Modern strategic studies programs routinely examine the Ankara campaign as an example of how technological innovation, cultural understanding, and systematic planning can be integrated into effective strategy. The cultural impact of the battle resonates through literature, art, and popular culture in ways that demonstrate its lasting hold on human imagination. From Marlowe's Tamburlaine the Great to modern historical novels and films, the story of how a simple stream became the weapon that toppled an empire continues to capture popular attention. The contrast between the heroic courage of individual warriors and the cold calculation of systematic planning touches on fundamental questions about the nature of honor, progress, and human achievement. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the Battle of Ankara lies in its demonstration that innovation and systematic thinking can overcome even the most established and powerful institutions. The Ottoman Empire in 1402 represented the pinnacle of military organization and tactical sophistication. Its defeat by what was essentially a more innovative approach to problem solving provides a template for understanding how established powers can be challenged and overcome. This lesson has particular relevance in the modern world, where technological and organizational innovations regularly disrupt established systems. The same principles that allowed Timurid to defeat a larger, more established army through careful preparation and unconventional tactics can be seen in everything from military conflicts to business, competition to social movements. The Battle of Ankara demonstrates that victory often goes not to the strongest or most numerous, but to those who best understand how to use available resources in innovative ways. The environmental implications of the battle also resonate with modern concerns about water resources and climate change. The demonstration that water can be weaponized, that control over essential resources can determine the outcome of conflicts, has particular relevance in an era of increasing water scarcity and environmental stress. Modern military planners routinely consider resource availability and environmental factors when developing strategies, building on principles first demonstrated at Ankara. The diplomatic and political lessons of the battle continue to influence international relations. Timur's understanding that military victory must be followed by careful political arrangements to have lasting impact anticipated modern concepts of post-conflict stabilization and nation-building. The temporary nature of his success in Anatolia, the Timurid Empire collapsed within decades of his death, demonstrates the limitations of purely military solutions to political problems. As we stand in the 21st century and look back across 600 years to that summer day in 1402, the Battle of Ankara remains relevant not just as a historical curiosity, but as a case study in innovation, adaptation, and the unexpected ways that human ingenuity can reshape the world. The small stream that Timur diverted has long since returned to its natural course, but the principles demonstrated by its manipulation continue to influence how we think about conflict, strategy, and the relationship between human ingenuity and political power. The secret weapon that destroyed the Ottoman Empire at Ankara was never really about water. It was about the power of systematic thinking, careful preparation, and innovative problem-solving to overcome seemingly impossible odds. In that respect, the legacy of the Çubuk stream flows not just through the landscape of Anatolia, but through the entire subsequent history of human conflict and achievement.